Very good morning. You're watching Today in Parliament with me, Aishwarya, and here are the Parliament headlines. Rajya Sabha to take up the Foreign Contribution Regulation Amendment Bill 2020 and the Financial Contracts Bilateral Netting Bill 2020 for consideration and passing today. Appropriation Bills number 3 and 4 also listed for consideration and return in the upper house. Lok Sabha proceedings to start at 6 p.m. today. House expected to take up the Major Port Authority Bill 2020 that introduces autonomy in decision-making of major ports. The Factoring Regulation Amendment Bill 2020 also scheduled in the day's business. And parliamentary committee reports to be tabled in both houses. Committee on Subordinate Legislation to present reports in the Rajya Sabha. The Committee on Estimates and Committee on Government Assurances to present their reports in the Lok Sabha. First up, a look at the legislative business in the Rajya Sabha today. The Foreign Contribution Regulation Amendment Bill 2020 is listed for consideration and passing in the upper house today. This bill amends the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act 2010. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will move the Bilateral Netting of Qualified Financial Contracts Bill 2020 for consideration and passing. The bill aims to ensure financial stability and promote competitiveness in Indian financial markets. Nirmala Sitharaman will also move the Appropriation Number 3 Bill 2020 and the Appropriation Number 4 Bill 2020 in the House for consideration and return. All right, Kriti Mishra, our colleague, is now joining us live from Parliament. Kriti, very good morning. So, Rajya Sabha cleared 7 crucial bills yesterday, making Tuesday's session one of the most productive sessions in the upper house history. And key bills on the agenda today include the FCRA bill that proposes a ban on the transfer of foreign contribution from one FCRA-registered NGO to another. There are also the appropriation bills in the House for consideration and return. Tell us more.
Well, Aishwarya, talking about yesterday's agenda, of course, we saw a fairly productive session of the Rajya Sabha. And talking about today's agenda, of course, important bills are listed for consideration and passage, including the Foreign Contribution Regulation Amendment Bill that provides for transparency and accountability in terms of foreign contribution. Remember, the government has on several occasions underscored the need for having a stern law in order to deal with such contributions. And earlier also, the government had deregistered around 19,000 such firms which received this contribution, which was dubious in nature. So this is a very important bill in order to avert the misappropriation of funds. And also there's another important bill, which is the Bilateral Netting of Qualified Financial Contracts Bill that seeks to further strengthen the financial markets of India and also to provide stability and make it more robust. And the appropriation bills would also be taken up for consideration and then returned to the Lok Sabha. Remember, this is a money bill that seeks to authorize appropriation of certain sums of money from the Consolidated Fund of India. So important legislative agenda in the Rajya Sabha today. Aishwarya?
Right. Kriti, stay with us. We'll just come back to you. We also need to discuss the legislative business in the lower house. So let's take a look at the legislative business in the Lok Sabha today. The business listed to be taken up today. Mansukh Mandavia is scheduled to move the Major Port Authorities Bill 2020 for consideration and passing. Harshvardhan is expected to move the Assisted Reproductive Technology Regulation Bill 2020 for consideration and passing. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is listed to move the Factoring Regulation Amendment Bill 2020 to be taken up for consideration and passing. All right, let's go back to Kriti. Kriti, talking about Lok Sabha, yesterday the lower house took up 3 important labour reforms bills and cleared them. And the lower house will sit at 6 p.m. today. And there are three key bills, including the Major Port Authority Bill 2020. And this is a very important bill because, it enables and empowers the major ports of our country to function with greater autonomy and decision-making power. There is also the Factoring Regulation Amendment Bill 2020, also scheduled in the day's business. Tell us more about these key bills that are listed in the lower house.
Well, talking about the day's agenda in the Lok Sabha, as you've mentioned, there are important bills that are lined up, including the Major Port Authorities Bill. Remember, the government has been talking about port-led development in India. The government has also been talking about blue economy. So ports constitute a very important part. This particular bill provides for greater autonomy, flexibility. There would be regulation of operations by the board of port authorities. So this bill would be taken up for consideration and passage in the Lok Sabha today. In addition to this, ART bill. Remember, surrogacy has gone up in India in recent times. So this particular bill provides for laying down certain norms and conditions for the conduct of this, and also provides for establishment of national boards and also state boards for regulating surrogacy in India. And there's also another important bill, which is the Factoring Regulation Bill, that provides to give breather to the MSMEs in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. So three important bills listed for consideration and passage in the Lok Sabha today. Aishwarya?
Right, Kriti. Thank you so much for all those updates there from Parliament. And in other legislative business in the upper house, and papers related to following ministries will be tabled. Let's take a look at them. The Ministry of Defence, Ministry of Textiles, Ayush Ministry, Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Ministry of Personnel, Public Grievances and Pensions, Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Ministry of Civil Aviation, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Ministry of Shipping, Ministry of Heavy Industries and Public Enterprises, Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution, Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, Ministry of Rural Development, Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. And following ministers are scheduled to make statements in the House today. Smriti Zubin Irani on the status of implementation of recommendations contained in the Parliamentary Standing Committee report on Labour on Demands for Grants 2019-2020 and Demands for Grants 2020-2021. Dr. Harshvardhan on the status of implementation of recommendations contained in the Parliamentary Standing Committee report on Science and Technology, Environment and Forests and Climate Change on Demands for Grants 2020-2021. Prakash Javadekar on the status of implementation of recommendations in the Parliamentary Standing Committee report on Information Technology on Demands for Grants 2020-2021. Dr. Jitendra Singh on the status of implementation of recommendations in the Parliamentary Standing Committee report on Home Affairs on Demands for Grants 2020-2021 pertaining to the Ministry of Development of North Eastern Region. Hardeep Singh Puri on the status of implementation of recommendations contained in the Parliamentary Standing Committee report on Urban Development on Demands for Grants 2020-2021. Danve Rao Sahib Dada Rao on the status of implementation of recommendations in the Parliamentary Standing Committee report on Food, Consumer Affairs and Public Distribution on Demands for Grants 2019-2020 and the Demands for Grants 2020-2021. Sanjeev Kumar Balyan on the status of implementation of recommendations contained in the Parliamentary Standing Committee report on Agriculture on Demands for Grants 2020-2021. Also a report of the study visit of the Committee on the Welfare of Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes to Guwahati, Itanagar, Imphal and Kolkata during November 2019 will be presented by members Ram Kumar Verma and Kanta Kardam, and reports of the Committee on Subordinate Legislation will be presented by members Pratap Singh Bajwa, Vikas Mahatme and Amar Patnaik. Union Minister Thawarchand Gehlot will move a motion for the election of a member from the House to the Rehabilitation Council of India. Union Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad will move a motion for the election of a member from the House to the Joint Committee on Offices of Profit. And with that, we wrap up this edition of Today in Parliament. Stay tuned to Rajya Sabha TV. Up next is Sansad Mein Aaj. Thanks for watching.